Well, good evening and welcome to our Friday night Bible study. This is for Friday, July, is it the 19th today, I believe? Well, let me look down here and double check. That's what it should be. Yep, July 19th. Boy, the month just goes by so fast. Anyway, some of you may be aware that computer world has run into some pretty serious problems yesterday and today. Yesterday, it had to do with Microsoft's web server, Azure. I think that's what Azure is. It's some Microsoft system. And then today, a security company called CloudStrike had problems, and they're apparently a very widely used cybersecurity solution. And they were putting computers into the what's called blue screen of death. In other words, instead of actually loading into the operating system, it loads up a blue screen and gives you some arcane text about some problem that's going on. Well, they've already developed a solution, but the problem is that the solution requires a manual restart of every affected computer. And I'm noticing that the website that we use for our Bible text isn't loading everything it normally would. And when I tried to reload it, it choked on me. So our computer's not been affected. We don't use CloudStrike, so we haven't had that problem. But the problem is out there, and it's making a mess. A lot of flights got canceled yesterday because of these problems, and banks are having trouble. Hospitals are having to um, cancel elective surgeries. Um, courts, the courts in Kansas they went on a computer system and they have had trouble with it off and on for the last few months. They got affected to where they were having to do paper filings because their online system for filings and information about defendants and so forth isn't working right for them. So we get so dependent on technology, and then when the technology lets us down, we're in a bit of trouble.
Yeah, it's kind of scary what they're doing with technology, how they're watching us.
Well, how they're watching it, and also all the things they can do now with AI, with artificial intelligence, and they can generate pictures that look very real, but it's all out of somebody's head. They said, develop a picture of such and so using these images. So you feed it a few images and say, now make this person do this and that kind of thing. So they actually got a picture of Donald Trump resisting arrest. Well, it didn't really happen, but AI made a picture that looked very realistic, as if it actually did happen. Of course, many of you are aware that earlier this week there was an assassination attempt. That was last weekend, wasn't it, on Donald Trump? But
Um,
he's since
Never.
he's since been essentially coronated by the Republican Party to be their presidential candidate. While meanwhile, Democrats are urging Joe Biden not to run again to make way for somebody else to be the party's candidate in November. And now an independent with a name, a recognizable name, has entered the race. And and that is RFK Jr., a Kennedy. And the last couple of days, I have seen advertising that he's put up to announce his candidacy and to encourage people to support him. Um, and he's advocating kind of a strange mix of policies. Um, well, anyway, all these odd things are going on this week. And then this week we ran into a bit of an issue.
Of what?
I said a bit of an issue.
Oh, okay.
Some of you may be aware that the name of the Facebook group where we normally post these Friday night Bible studies, In Vain Do They Worship Me, is also the name of a website that my wife set up a number of years ago. And for a while, she was putting up a blog post every week or even more than once a week. I was just looking at the site and I didn't count it. She's probably got more than 100 posts there. And there are some other things posted. She's got links to some internet resources that she has felt were helpful to her spiritually. But over the last year or so, she hasn't really been able to do much with it. Well, she got a notice that a charge had been posted regarding the web hosting service that she's using. And so she went in to look at it, and then she went into her account, and we ran into a little trouble getting onto the account. And eventually we found out that the username that they wanted her to use was not the username that she had been using all along. And the change happened without any notice to us. We just had to kind of figure out, well, why aren't we able to sign in here? And we'd say, well, here, let me refresh my password. And they'd say, well, we can't refresh the password for that username because it doesn't exist. And she eventually caught on when we did figure out what username they wanted her to use. The hosting company that she was working with apparently got bought up by another company. And in the transition, the other company saw two accounts and retained those two accounts. And my wife had talked to a technical support specialist with the earlier company. How many years ago was that? Do you remember?
Whenever it was, I set up that website.
So that was quite a number of years ago.
For me, I don't have the knowledge to do that. So they set it up for me, and they set up two different accounts. And they told me the one was theirs. It was their administrative account. Don't ever touch it. So I never did.
Well,
and when this new company bought them out, they set up my account under the name of that account that I was not supposed to ever touch.
Yeah. So then when we got in there, we saw the two accounts. So we started a chat with customer support and asked them why we had two accounts. And well, they weren't sure exactly why, but they guessed it had something to do with the different services being, and she thought it probably happened when the company was bought up. But she did give us a link to a page that told us how to merge the two accounts. So we did that, and then one of the things that we thought we needed to do, because when we got on to look at it, it said you have an expired payment method. Well, they had one payment method. It expired in April of last year, was it? Or April of a year before that even. And then it had one that was expiring this month. Well, the card we're actually using for it doesn't expire until sometime in 26. So we went in and we updated the payment method. But now we've only got the one because we've only got the one account with them. So we got that sorted out. And while she was at it, my wife said that she wanted me to be able to administer the site. So she put that in, and I got an email. And so yesterday sometime, I got on and created an account for myself and got in. And I did make one small change to the site. There was a section in there that was pretty badly dated. So I took that out and put in a note that I was going to become a little bit more involved with the site. I'm hoping at some point that we can actually put in links to both the Facebook group where most of you watch this Friday night Bible study, but also to the YouTube page where I'm also uploading the Friday night part. Now, I have not been uploading the sermon presentations that we do once every 4 weeks, and once every 4 weeks comes again tomorrow. So we'll mention that again a little bit later, but we do plan to do a presentation, sermon presentation, and if you want to see it live, it will be done around 11 o'clock tomorrow, but then it'll be available anytime thereafter when you would like to watch it. So that's what's been going on, and so I think maybe what we need to do is have a word of prayer and get started on tonight's Bible study, where we will be continuing in the book of Exodus. So let's bow our heads. Our Father in heaven, we want to thank you for keeping us safe through the past week, and for giving us the growth opportunities and the blessings that have come our way. We want to take a little time to examine the written word this evening. We hold no idea that the written word is the way to be saved. We understand that that's through the living word, through Jesus Christ. There is no other name, no other character by which we must be saved. But we do believe that we can use the written word to lead us in that direction. So we ask that you will send your Holy Spirit, that every person who hears this meeting tonight and this study will receive the blessing that you intend for that person to receive. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So, here we are in Exodus chapter 17. Again, we're using the New Living Translation. You can see that there at the top of the page. We're not saying that this is a great translation, but we do like the way that it kind of gets us out of what we're used to reading and makes us think about it. It is a highly interpretive translation, and so sometimes we refer back to more literal translations to get a clearer idea of what the original languages had to say. So, chapter 17 starts out at the Lord's command, and we understand that that was done through the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night, and that eventually it would park itself above the sanctuary. The sanctuary hasn't been made yet, so we're not to that part. And as long as it stayed down, they would stay where they were. When it lifted, then they would all have to pack up and, roll up their tents and have everything packed up and ready to go. And they would go wherever that cloud or pillar of fire led them. So that may have been the nature of the Lord's command here when it says that the whole community of Israel left the wilderness of sin and moved from place to place. Eventually, they camped at Rephidim, but there was no water there for the people to drink. So, once more, the people complained against Moses. Why did you bring us out of Egypt? Are you trying to kill us, our children, and our livestock with thirst? Oh, wait a minute. I skipped a bunch there. They complained against Moses. Give us water to drink, they demanded. I don't know. Was this a case of blind faith? Moses had gotten them out of Egypt. Moses had led them through the Red Sea.
No, it's a case of doing what you've been told to do for fear of what will happen to you. It's a case of conditioning.
But they're complaining against Moses. The question I'm asking is, what made them think Moses could do anything about it? Other than they had seen what had happened at the Red Sea, the things that had happened in Egypt, and thought, well, maybe he can do something about it.
Well, consider what their idea of God was. They had been far enough distanced from Jacob, or Abraham even, that they didn't really have a clue what God was, except that they were supposed to worship him.
Yeah.
All they knew, they had been conditioned to do as they were told on the pain of beatings or worse.
Well, yeah, because they were slaves. This is true.
And here comes Moses telling them through his own lens that God's going to deliver them, and then he's adding things that don't really go along with God's character, which causes them to respond to Moses out of fear.
Mm-hmm.
So they follow Moses, and Moses has taken them out there, and now they're hungry. So who else are they going to blame? They don't have the concept to blame themselves for following him. He's the one in charge, so he's the one they blame.
And notice how quick they are to want to cast blame to begin with. My life has gotten hard. Not my fault. Somebody else is to blame. Who can I pin the blame on? So they pick out Moses.
At what point in their moral development were they?
Well, at the very earliest stages, clearly.
Yeah. Act in this way, or else I'll be punished.
Yeah. Quiet, Moses replied. Why are you complaining against me? And why are you testing the Lord? Do not tempt the Lord your God. Test, tempt. It's the same thing. In fact, let me look. Does the King James say tempt there? Yes, the King James does in fact say tempt there, but the Hebrew means to test. Why do you test God. But tormented by thirst, they continued to argue with Moses. Now it's the part I jumped to earlier and read. Why did you bring us out of Egypt? Are you trying to kill us, our children, and our livestock with thirst? As bad as things were when they were in Egypt, once they're away from it, they tend to forget how bad it was, and they look back on it and think, you had it pretty good back there.
Well, now, wait a minute. Let's think of somebody with an addiction.
Okay.
When they are, we'll say, hungover, you can be hungover from something other than alcohol. When you're hungover, you're miserable, and you realize that what you're doing is not something you need to be doing. But then you tend to forget, as the urge to imbibe whatever that addiction is, you begin to forget that this is really not something you should be doing. And the will to whatever self-harming you're doing is stronger than the will to not self-harm.
Mm-hmm.
When they are in the situation that the Israelites were in, complaining was all they had.
Yeah.
And they probably couldn't even openly complain. So if they were unable to openly complain, the fact that they were openly complaining is a sign of growth.
Yeah. One of the ideas I was getting at there, when we were in the New Testament, we read something that Jesus said. He had gone to eat at Matthew's house, and the Pharisees had criticized him, and he had something to say about it, and that included putting new wine into new wineskins. And when he got done talking about that, he made a cryptic statement. And no one, when he has had the old, wants the new, for he says, the old is better. That's one of the phenomena of human nature I think we're seeing here. Separated as they were by however many days, maybe up to a month, from their bondage in Egypt, their memories are already beginning to be transformed in their minds. And when they look back on it, they look back on it with a little bit of nostalgia. Things were better back then. And there are a lot of people that get caught up with that. They see the world changing because that's what the world does. If you're going to grow, you've got to change. You can't get better without changing. So there's going to be change, unless you get stagnant and aren't growing, aren't going anywhere. But that change can be frightening because it involves the unknown. And so people look forward to the unknown, and they look back, and their minds have kind of played silly buggers with their memories, and they don't remember all the hardship and trial. They remember the good things, and so they think, if we could only have policies like we had back then, life would be better.
You remind me of a friend that we had in the past, an elderly man who is no longer with us.
Mm-hmm.
He was talking about when he was young.
Mm-hmm.
And raised in the north. And he was talking about how he had to walk 20 miles to go to school.
Yeah.
And play.
Sure. Uphill
And,
both ways. Uphill both ways.
Why can't kids act like that today? But then he got a funny look on his face, and he told about the time he went and he bought some chicken in the winter. And he put them in a gunny sack and swung it over his shoulder, or then right up against his back, and he walked home. And when he got home, his chickens were all dead. They froze.
Yeah.
If he had the modern transportation, those chickens would have survived.
Yep. Well, at any rate, this is what they're saying. Why did you bring us out of Egypt? We'd be better off if we were back there. You're going to hear this out of their mouths again and again as we read through the story here in Exodus. Then Moses cried out to the Lord, "What should I do with these people? They are ready to stone me." The Lord said to Moses, "Walk out in front of the people. Take your staff, the one you used when you struck the water of the Nile, and call some of the elders of Israel to join you. I will stand before you on the rock at Mount Sinai." Now, the footnote B there is going to tell us that the Hebrew is Horeb, or the mountain of God. Which they say is another name for Sinai. Strike the rock, and water will come gushing out. Then the people will be able to drink. So Moses struck the rock as he was told, and water gushed out as the elders looked on. Moses named the place Massah, which means test, and Meribah, which means arguing, because the people of Israel argued with Moses and tested the Lord by saying, "Is the Lord here with us or not?" While the people of Israel were still at Rephidim, the warriors of Amalek attacked them. Now, we need a reminder here of who Amalek was. We mentioned it briefly when we came across it in the genealogy of Esau. Amalek was a grandson of Esau. He was a son of Esau's oldest, Eliphaz. Eliphaz had who knows how many wives, but he also had a concubine named Timnah. And Amalek was the son of Eliphaz and Timnah. And I have mentioned before, and I probably will mention it again, that a number of times as we read the Old Testament here, we are going to find instances where the son of a concubine causes a lot of trouble. And here's one of these cases. The Israelites are out wandering in the wilderness. At least that's what it looks like to other people. God's leading them. They aren't really wandering, but it might look like that to people who don't know what's going on. And these Amalekites, being the descendants of someone who was, probably not entirely loved by father, and may have, felt that he was the ungolden child, if he even was considered part of the family. They're going to have if you're going to survive in this world, you got to be strong. You got to go take what you want. So they see a group of people that they believe are underprotected, easy pickings, and they go after them. Now, what I'm going to find interesting as we get into this story is that we are not seeing, until the story is over, God say anything to Moses. The warriors of Amalek attacked the people of Israel. We read that in verse 8. Now in verse 9, Moses commanded Joshua, "Choose some men to go out and fight the army of Amalek for us. Tomorrow I will stand at the top of the hill, holding the staff of God in my hand." Notice it doesn't say God told him to. This is what Moses decided to do. He put some fighting men out there under Joshua's command and says, "You go out and take care of this, and I'll stand on the hillside and support you." Well, let's read and see what happened. So Joshua did what Moses had commanded and fought the army of Amalek. Meanwhile, Moses, Aaron, and Hur climbed to the top of a nearby hill. As long as Moses held up the staff in his hand, the Israelites had the advantage. But whenever he dropped his hand, the Amalekites gained the advantage. Moses' arms soon became so tired he could no longer hold them up. Humans aren't designed for working overhead. I spent a small part of my life working as an electrician, and one of the hardest jobs was wiring the overhead boxes from which we would hang lights, because you had to put your hands up over your head and do the work up there. And the blood flows away from it, and it makes it hard for your heart to pump the blood up that high. So holding your arms up high is not an easy thing, and it's not something you can do for an extended period of time. You have to take a break. So Moses is holding up the staff in his hand, but at some point he's too tired to keep it there. And if he drops his hand, Amalek takes advantage and moves against the people of Israel. So Aaron and Hur found a stone for him to sit on. Then they stood on each side of Moses, holding up his hands.
But that sounds awfully mysticism.
Well, yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Well, were they really doing what God wanted here, or as I've suggested since God hasn't said anything yet, was Moses just giving the commands that came to his mind as a former military commander in Egypt.
Speaking
So,
for God.
huh?
Speaking for God through his own lenses,
Yeah.
his own set of values.
Yeah. As a result, Joshua overwhelmed the army of Amalek in battle. And they turned around and didn't bother Israel, at least for a while. I'm trying to remember right now if there was another instance during this period when the people of Amalek attacked Israel, but we'll have to wait and see. I don't remember exactly. There is a song that mentions this event. It's a mission song. One of the verses says, "If you cannot cross the ocean," something like that, "you can find the heathen nearer. You can find them at your door." And then another verse concludes in about the same part of the melody. "You can be like faithful Aaron, holding up the prophet's hands." So that was the interpretation somebody put on this story. At any rate, after the victory, the Lord instructed Moses. Well, now God comes and speaks. "Write this down on a scroll as a permanent reminder and read it aloud to Joshua. I will erase the memory of Amalek from under heaven." Moses built an altar there and named it Yahweh Nissi, which means "the Lord is my banner." He said, "They have raised their fist against the Lord's throne, so now the Lord will be at war with Amalek generation after generation." Well, that's not exactly what God had said. He simply said he would wipe the memory of them from under heaven. He didn't say how he would do it. But Moses, having been raised in Egypt, in the royal family, assumed that meant that the Lord would be at war with Amalek generation after generation. Footnote C there. Hands have been lifted up to the Lord's throne, and now, well, that's interesting. Because you could interpret that phrase, "hands have been lifted up to the Lord's throne," as referring to what had happened as Aaron and Hur held Moses' hands up during the battle.
Is this why people hold their hands up when they pray?
I don't know. That could be. I remember an incident many years ago when I was in another state. This is before I met my wife. And
Oh, that's ancient history.
huh?
That is ancient history.
Yeah. There was a young man who had come to the church that I was attending at the time, and he got up without really any authorization between services, and he started talking about how important it was to lift your arms toward God when you prayed. And he was trying to get the people in the congregation to hold their hands up like that, and he wasn't having a lot of success. And I had gone back into the foyer for some purpose, and I'm back in there. I'm thinking, You know, that was embarrassing to me. It was uncomfortable, and I'm like, I'm so glad I'm not in there with those poor people. Uh, but I can imagine how they felt because these were mostly older people, and it wasn't the kind of thing they would have been comfortable doing. Poor guy. Anyway, and I don't remember what he was saying and what he believed. I think it's supposed to be the receiving pose. You lift your arms to God to receive the blessing that He will give you. Now, here's the problem that may be related to this computer outage. Normally, this site puts a little arrow here to allow me to go on to the next chapter, and they have not done that. So I may have to. Well, this is acting funny. It looks like it's hung up on me here. I'm ready to move on to chapter 18. Yeah, okay. So let's open a new tab here and go to it that way and close that. Now we can get the Bible book list open. Yeah, there may be some problems going on that might be related to today's computer glitches. Exodus chapter 18, Jethro's visit to Moses. Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian, heard about everything God had done for Moses and his people, the Israelites. He heard especially about how the Lord had rescued them from Egypt. Earlier, now this is something that we weren't told about when it happened. We're just being told about it now. Sometime earlier, Moses had sent his wife Zipporah and his 2 sons back to Jethro, who had taken them in.
Didn't that happen when they were attacked on the way to Egypt?
Yeah, it doesn't say there. We know that event happened, and it
Blood to me.
I was talking, you started talking, I couldn't hear a thing you said because the phone had you silenced. Try again.
That would be when she said to Moses, You're a bridegroom of blood to me.
Yeah.
That was hard to say.
Yeah. And it's possible that it happened there, but the narrative of that part doesn't say that's when it happened, so we don't know. It could be that Moses got to Egypt and it became pretty clear that the people weren't going to immediately be let out, that Pharaoh was going to dig in his heels, and this was going to be a protracted confrontation before the people of Israel would be allowed to leave. And Moses didn't want his wife and his sons exposed to that. It might also be that Zipporah herself saw what was going on there and the kind of opposition that her husband faced and didn't want to be part of it. And it may have been in part her idea to go back to her father's place with her sons and wait for her husband to bring the people out of Egypt and then to meet him later.
No, it could have been a lack of trust in God as well, fearing that she and her children would get involved in slavery.
Could be, yeah. Mm-hmm. It says Moses had sent his wife, but that was a highly. This is being written by somebody who's highly male dominant. Men were in charge. So as Zipporah left, well, it was Moses' idea. Moses sent them.
Well, didn't Moses himself, the most humble man alive, write it?
Yeah. Now, then it stops to remind us of some genealogy here. Moses' first son was named Gershom, for Moses had said when the boy was born, I have been a foreigner in a foreign land. His second son was named Eliezer, for Moses had said, the God of my ancestors was my helper. He rescued me from the sword of Pharaoh. And there were two footnotes there for the names, and those are that Gershom sounds like a Hebrew term that means a foreigner there, whereas Eliezer means God is my helper. El is the Hebrew word that we would equate with saying God, as opposed to using the special name Yahweh. There was El, as in El Shaddai, God Almighty. So Eliezer, God is my helper. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, now came to visit Moses in the wilderness. He brought Moses' wife and 2 sons with him, and they arrived while Moses and the people were camped near the mountain of God. Well, at this point, Jethro's probably not very far from home, because Moses encountered the burning bush there at the mountain of God while he was watching Jethro's flocks. So wherever Jethro lived, the mountain of God was relatively nearby. How far away, we don't know, but probably, within a few days' walk anyway. Jethro had sent a message to Moses saying, I, Jethro, your father-in-law, am coming to see you with your wife and your 2 sons. Now, if he sent a message, that means he had a servant carry either a written message, or he simply instructed the servant in what to say and said, memorize this and tell it to Moses when you get there. And in those days, to send a messenger ahead, the messenger would have had to do some long distance running. Now, we have expressed in the past that the design of the human animal indicates that we are optimized for long distance running. Unlike the other large apes, humans do not have an opposable digit on their feet. An opposable digit on your feet is real handy for climbing a tree. But it would be a problem if you're trying to do long distance running. The human animal has a very flat face, no muzzle. Again, if the human animal had a muzzle, that would be weight out in front of the neck. It would put stress on the neck when running long distances. So the flat face is a design element that makes it easier for the human animal to engage in long distance running. And so there were people, even in that age, that made use of those characteristics of their bodies and would serve as messengers and would be able to cover long distances in a relatively short period of time, to carry messages from one person to another and to carry replies back, and so on. So Jethro sent the message ahead, and so Moses, now verse 7, went out to meet his father-in-law. he bowed low and kissed him. They asked about each other's welfare and then went into Moses' tent. Moses told his father-in-law everything the Lord had done to Pharaoh and Egypt on behalf of Israel. He also told about all the hardships they had experienced along the way and how the Lord had rescued his people from all their troubles. That would have included the wood thrown into the waters at Marah and striking the rock there at the mountain of God in Rephidim. Jethro was delighted when he heard about all the good things the Lord had done for Israel as he rescued them from the hand of the Egyptians. "Praise the Lord," Jethro said, "for he has rescued you from the Egyptians and from Pharaoh." Yes, he has rescued Israel from the powerful hand of Egypt. "I know now that the Lord is greater than all other gods because he rescued his people from the oppression of the proud Egyptians." Now this might sound a little bit curious. Jethro was the priest of Midian. Midian was one of the tribes descended from Ishmael. So you would expect that he had a level of understanding of Abraham's God. And yet he talks here as if he's seen something new about the character of God that he hadn't known before, even in his position as the priest of Midian. And perhaps
Isn't that supposed to be something amazing? I mean, isn't it said in the book of Revelation that the angels nearest to his throne constantly behold him, and yet they continue all throughout eternity call out, what is it, glory or something?
holy, holy, holy.
When they see something new about his character, when they learn something new, it's been there all along. They just hadn't yet recognized it.
Yeah. Well, I think the lesson that we might be able to draw from this is that no matter how old we are, no matter how many years we have behind us in Bible study, we can always gain new understandings of God's character.
The question is, will you accept it?
Well, yeah. If you take the position, as a lot of organized religion does, that this is what we believe, we're going to believe this forever, that you might be missing out on this advancing understanding of who God is and the growth and spiritual development that could be yours if you allowed for that improved understanding over time.
You know, I have heard Adventists say that we have nothing left to learn. We already know it all.
Well, yeah, and that's kind of like the tree or the fish. A fish will grow for its entire life. A tree grows for as long as it is still alive. If a tree or a fish stops growing, it dies. I would suggest that spiritually, if we stop growing, if we stop advancing, if we stop trying to improve our understanding of our Creator, we face spiritual death. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices to God. Aaron and all the elders of Israel came out and joined him in a sacrificial meal in God's presence. The next day, Moses took his seat to hear the people's disputes against each other. They waited before him from morning till evening. Now, in the modern world, we have a number of systems for dealing with disputes. There are informal structures, there are more formal mediation services, and if you really can't agree, then there's the courts. And one party will sue another. Case I heard recently, I think this was out of Michigan based on some names I heard. This guy had a snowplow and he had reached agreement with some property owners to do the snow plowing on their roads and on their property for a given price. And he even worked out an agreement that became part of the deeds to the property, so that anybody who bought the property would buy into that agreement. And he was in court suing somebody who hadn't been paying him. And they're like, nobody told us that this was an agreement. He's not doing anything for us. In fact, if anything, he's plowing snow off of other people's property onto our property, and then he wants to charge us for it. The judge didn't make a decision. He put that off until next month or the month after. They're going to have to come back, and they're going to have to develop their cases more and find ways to present their evidence, because so that's the kind of thing that humans do. They get in disputes, well, then they take it to court. So that's what Moses is doing here. He's serving as the court system, the civil court system, and possibly also criminal, because some of these disputes may have involved criminal activities like theft or assault. They would bring these things to Moses, and Moses would have to hear them.
Achan.
What?
Achan.
Well, yeah, we'll get to the story of Achan in the book of Joshua, but yeah. When Moses' father-in-law saw all that Moses was doing for the people, he asked, "What are you really accomplishing here? Why are you trying to do this, or do all this alone, while everyone stands around you from morning till evening?" Moses replied, "Because the people come to me to get a ruling from God. When a dispute arises..."
Tell them, go away.
I didn't hear the context of that. All I heard was the tell them go away.
I was being snarky.
Oh,
I said he was too humble.
oh. When a dispute arises, they come to me, and I am the one who settles the case between the quarreling parties. I inform the people of God's decrees and give them his instructions. "This is not good," Moses' father-in-law exclaimed. "You're going to wear yourself out, and the people too. This job is too heavy a burden for you to handle all by yourself. Now, listen to me. Let me give you a word of advice, and may God be with you. You should continue to be the people's representative before God, bringing their disputes to him. Teach them God's decrees and give them his instructions. Remember, these are people at an extremely low level of moral development. They don't know how to behave. All they know is do what the boss tells you or get a whipping." So now they're trying to form a nation to become independent human beings, and they don't know what to do. So they have all these disputes between themselves, and they're bringing them to Moses, and they need to be instructed some of the common sense, ordinary, unselfish practices that allow us to live with other people and not rip each other's throats out. So Jethro says, well, these people do need to be taught. They're not very bright right now, but you can't do this all by yourself. You need to teach them God's decrees, give them his instructions, show them how to conduct their lives. But select from all the people some capable, honest men who fear God and hate bribes. Appoint them as leaders over groups of 1,000, 150, and 10. They should always be available to solve the people's common disputes, but have them bring the major cases to you. Let the leaders decide the smaller matters themselves. They will help you carry the load, making the task easier for you. If you follow this advice, and if God commands you to do so, then you will be able to endure the pressures, and all these people will go home in peace. Now, this is an interesting idea, and it probably was already established in parts of the world as governments began to realize that, one person couldn't deal with everything. You needed to have layers of responsibility so that there would be people who could take care of the simple cases, and then other people who would take care of more complicated cases that those people couldn't deal with, and kind of step it up until you have someone who serves as the final word on disputes that the previous arbitrators could not deal with.
If there is a job that needs to be done and you're in charge of it, but you don't feel like you are qualified and somebody could do better at it than you, then it would be wise to give that somebody else that responsibility.
Yeah, in the business world they call that delegation. You delegate tasks to people. You're ultimately in control, but you delegate some of the responsibility to somebody else so that you're not overwhelmed, because you don't have time enough to do everything.
Yeah, I'm thinking like the employer who doesn't have the courage to fire someone, so he gets someone else to do it.
So he hires an HR person to do all that for him, yeah. We have that in our court systems too. I'm going to use the terminology from some states. Different states will have different terminology. So you have the lowest level courts usually at the county level. There's usually district courts, and then in some states you have district courts, which are kind of the lowest level. They handle the misdemeanors and some of the simpler cases. And then you have the circuit courts. And a person might be accused by the police, brought in, and be arraigned in district court. And then the district court will hold a preliminary examination in which the judge determines if there is probable cause to believe that a crime was committed and that the defendant committed it. And if that determination is made, then the case is bound over to the next level court, to the circuit court. And then the
Well,
circuit courts,
theoretically should work.
yeah, then the circuit courts will deal with the felonies and the higher things. And generally, district courts are where you'll take your small claims. If you want to make, if you want an attorney to help you out, you can't do that in small claims court. Then you have to go to the circuit courts to file your lawsuit, and that can be expensive. With small claims courts, the term means that there's a limitation on how much of a judgment you can get. You can't have an attorney, things like that. If you want an attorney, then you have to go to district court. And then after the district courts, then usually there's a court of appeals at some point, and there's a state supreme court. But there are also federal courts, and then there are federal courts of appeal, and then there is the United States Supreme Court, which is tasked with interpreting the Constitution of the United States. And so a case gets brought to it. In order to appeal a case to the Supreme Court of the United States, you have to be able to state a constitutional issue that the court needs to address in order to determine, well, let's say a state passes a law and you believe that the law violates a principle of the Constitution. Well, you might, and this was done, for example, in the 20s with the teaching of evolution in public schools. They actually picked somebody who took a couple of students aside and taught them evolution in order to generate a court case, and then that court case they could raise the constitutional issue of whether or not it was appropriate for the state to forbid certain things from being taught. They didn't win that case, but that's how cases get to the Supreme Court. Often something is done to actually generate a court case so that then you can get a ruling from the lower courts and then go to the Supreme Court to get a ruling on the constitutional issue in question. And of course, you might hear people talk, well, I'll appeal this all the way to the Supreme Court. Well, that's kind of a turn of phrase because the Supreme Court is not required to hear any case at all. You can appeal to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court will decide whether or not it will take the case. But the point I'm making is that what Jethro suggested here is being done even today, where you have levels of authority and levels of responsibility so that the person on top isn't overwhelmed with all the things that need to be dealt with.
May I say something?
Sure.
I don't ask people to send us money.
No, we don't.
I don't. However, since we're speaking courts and court system, there is a lady out there who may be placed in a position where she has to face double jeopardy. She's already been found guilty. I'm sorry. She's already been found not guilty. Yet she may be having the same charges filed against her again. And there's no way any thinking person could find her guilty of what they've charged her with. And she's already spent $1 million in lawyer fees. And now she's facing being recharged with the same crime. Her name is Karen Reed, and there are GoFundMe pages for her.
You have to be careful though, because there are people putting up fake ones.
Well, I was going to say, she's got a sister. I believe her sister is Carrie. She's selling popcorn. Um, before you eat, I'm asking that you, I'm not going to ask collect money for her, but I'm going to ask that if you can go to YouTube and um, look, well, let's see, somebody that has good coverage would be um, Attorney Lee, Lee, or Melanie Little. They have covered extensively um, what's happened with Karen Reed, and you can follow the on YouTube. They've got videos of the court proceedings, and you can see where there has been lying by all kinds of witnesses, including police officers. Um, the judge has been called Ms. Cranky Pants. She has acted in ways that were unprofessional. Anyway, if you would go and watch what Ms. Karen Reed has been put through and what she is still facing, if you can find it in your heart to donate, it would be really nice and appreciated.
Well, we have a little bit of time left here. Let's move on and read the next chapter. I think this is kind of a shorter chapter. Well, it's not a real long chapter. Chapter 19. And for those of you who are familiar with the book of Exodus, you know what comes after chapter 19. And now we're given a timeline of sorts. Exactly 2 months after the Israelites left Egypt, footnote A, in the 3rd month after the Israelites left Egypt, on the very day, that is 2 lunar months to the day after leaving Egypt, compare Numbers 33:3, they arrived in the wilderness of Sinai. After breaking camp at Rephidim, they came to the wilderness of Sinai and set up camp there at the base of Mount Sinai, or Mount Horeb. Then Moses climbed the mountain to appear before God. The Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "Give these instructions to the family of Jacob. Announce it to the descendants of Israel. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians. You know how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you will obey me and keep my covenant, you will be my own special treasure from among all the peoples on earth, for all the earth belongs to me. And you will be my kingdom of priests, my holy nation. This is the message you must give to the people of Israel." And as I was reading that, I was wondering if perhaps that has elements of Hebrew poetry in it. I wanted to look at a version that renders poetic passages with in the text, so you can see where the lines begin and end, and see if they did that with that. No, they did not. But it almost sounded like it. You've got a repetition of an idea using different terminology. Give these instructions to the family of Jacob. Announce it to the descendants of Israel. So he said the same thing, but it's in different words. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians. You know how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. All right, there's again a couplet or a pair. Now, if you will obey me and keep my covenant, you will be my own special treasure from among all the peoples on earth. And then kind of as a coda to that part. For all the earth belongs to me. And you will be my kingdom of priests. And then again, my holy nation. So, I think you can see the parallelism there. The kingdom of priests, the holy nation, are two ways of saying essentially the same thing. God had chosen them. He wants to favor them. He wants them, if they're a kingdom of priests, what does a priest do? Well, a priest represents God to the people. The priest teaches the people about God. The priest leads the people to God. If he's calling the people of Israel a kingdom of priests, then he wants them as a nation to lead the rest of the world to him. And when we get into Old Testament prophecy, which will probably take a few years at the rate we go, we'll see that very same theme repeated over and over. How God wants to use the nation of Israel to bring the entire world to him. Something they couldn't do as long as they held the beliefs that the Pharisees and most Jewish religious leaders of Jesus' day espoused. So Moses returned from the mountain and called together the elders of the people and told them everything the Lord had commanded him. And all the people responded together, "We will do everything the Lord has commanded." So the Lord brought the people's answer back to the Lord. And then the Lord said to Moses, "I will come to you in a thick cloud, Moses, so the people themselves can hear me when I speak with you. Then they will always trust you." Moses told the Lord what the people had said. "We'll do everything the Lord has commanded," is what they said. Then the Lord told Moses, "Go down and prepare the people for my arrival. Consecrate them today and tomorrow, and have them wash their clothing. Be sure they are ready on the third day, for on that day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai as all the people watch." And I want to look that up in the King James and see what language it uses there. Yeah, well, it's interesting. King James says wash their clothes there, so I guess that's not that far out. All right. Then the Lord told Moses, "Go down and prepare the people for my arrival. Consecrate them today and tomorrow, and have them wash their clothing. Be sure they are ready on the third day, for on that day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai as all the people watch. Mark off a boundary all around the mountain. Warn the people. Be careful. Do not go up on the mountain or even touch its boundaries. Anyone who touches the mountain will certainly be put to death. No hand may touch the person or animal that crosses the boundary. Instead, stone them or shoot them with arrows. They must be put to death. However, when the ram's horn sounds a long blast, then the people may go up on the mountain." Footnote B for that, which says up to the mountain. All right. Now that sounds rather draconian, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Touch the mountain, well, then you've got to either stone them or shoot them with arrows. Don't touch them. we're going to suggest this may be a misinterpretation by Moses of what God was actually trying to communicate here. And I am going to suggest, once we get a little further on here, that today's world also tends to misinterpret what's going on here. So Moses went down to the people. He consecrated.
Kind of like the lifting up of the serpent.
Yeah, we haven't gotten to that part yet, but we did have a sermon presentation on it more than a year ago.
Yeah. Moses was not actually told to make a snake. And the symbology of lifting up a snake is he had them looking to Satan as their savior.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. And that thing became a snare to the people many years later, too. Verse 14, so Moses went down to the people. He consecrated them for worship, and they washed their clothes. He told them, get ready for the third day, and until then, abstain from having sexual intercourse. Let me look that up in the King James. Wow, okay, the King James kind of comes at it as you would expect people in that day to come not at your wives.
What?
The King James says, come not at your wives. Let me see what the NIV says there.
Ask your wife.
What'd you say?
Come not ask your wife.
At, A-T.
Come not at your wife.
That's what it says, yes. And the yor is supplied by there. So the Hebrew would have been just, come not at wives.
W-I-F-E.
W-I-V-E-S.
Oh, plural.
Yes. Okay, yeah, the NIV says abstain from sexual relations.
Oh, all right.
Which is essentially what this one says.
Interesting way of putting it.
Yeah. On the morning of the third day, thunder roared and lightning flashed, and a dense cloud came down on the mountain. There was a long, loud blast from a ram's horn, and all the people trembled. Moses led them out from the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. All of Mount Sinai was covered with smoke, because the Lord had descended on it in the form of fire. The smoke billowed into the sky like smoke from a brick kiln, and the whole mountain shook violently. As the blast of the ram's horn grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God thundered his reply. The Lord came down on the top of Mount Sinai and called Moses to the top of the mountain, so Moses climbed the mountain. Then the Lord told Moses, go back down and warn the people not to break through the boundaries to see the Lord, or they will die. Even the priests who regularly come near to the Lord must purify themselves so that the Lord does not break out and destroy them. But Lord, Moses protested, The people cannot come up to Mount Sinai. You already warned us. You told me, mark off a boundary all around the mountain and set it apart as holy. But the Lord said, go down and bring Aaron back up with you. In the meantime, do not let the priests or the people break through to approach the Lord, or he will break out and destroy them. So Moses went down to the people and told them what the Lord had said. Now, this often gets used to suggest that God is dealing with his people in a shock and awe. He has come down to, as we sometimes put the fear of God into them. You better be afraid of God, because if you don't, he'll destroy you. He'll wipe you out. He'll burn you up.
Gonna zap them.
Yeah, and that's ruled by fear. And people, when they are acting out of fear, because of what evolution has done to us, do not have access to their rational brains. They can only respond emotionally. So what is all this smoke and fire and thunder and lightning all about? Well, the Bible does say that our God is a consuming fire. What does God destroy in his presence? Sin. That's exactly right. Anything that does not comport with his design for life in his universe would be destroyed in his presence. That's how pure he is. And so, when God came down to the mountain, the people, steeped as they were in all the broken approaches to living that had been theirs as slaves, they did not dare approach God's presence, not because God was angry with them or wanted to destroy them, but simply because until they were separated from sin, it would not be safe for them to approach God.
And by being separated from sin, do you mean putting aside the things that are separating you from the life source?
Well, essentially, yes, exactly. And we're all in that process. So right now, none of us would dare to enter the presence of God because we are not yet fully separated from sin. So God's presence would destroy us along with the sin that's in our lives. And let's be clear here. A lot of times when people say that, they think of sin as something you do, a list of rules that you've broken. That's what sin is. They'll take that text out of John, sin is a transgression of the law. So if you break God's law, that's sin. Sin is a condition that we are born into as human beings, as residents of this broken, faulty world. And, stopping doing the things that are, quotes, against the law does not deliver us from sin. But God's presence does destroy sin, and through Jesus Christ, God has made it possible for him to ease us into his presence such that the sin is destroyed, but we are not. And that's why Jesus came to this earth, to provide that pathway. That's why we need the Holy Spirit, because the Spirit is able to ease us into God's presence, destroying the sin, but not us. And that's what I think all this fire and smoke and thundering and lightning and all is all about. It's God warning the people about their condition, but wanting to come down and be close to them and to make them aware of the most important list of rules that he's about to give them, which we will encounter when we get to chapter 20, which we will have to do next week because our time is up. Was there anything you wanted to say before we signed off?
Well, no.
Okay.
You guys have a wonderful week.
Well, again, a reminder, and this assumes that my sleep cycles aren't totally messed up. I kind of forgot it was today and that we needed to sit down and record this until my wife said, is it Friday? I'm like, I have, like an hour and 15 minutes to be ready to get started here. So, but we do have a sermon presentation for tomorrow, 11 o'clock, assuming nothing goes terribly wrong or the internet doesn't completely die. We usually do stream that live at 11 o'clock Central Time if you want to join us live. But like I say, it will be recorded. You can view it at some other time if that's what you'd like to do. So, until then and until next week, when we continue in the book of Exodus, we say goodbye and God bless.